Hi, Tennessee Voices viewers. This is David Plazas again, the Opinion and Engagement Director for the USA Today Network Tennessee and the Tennessean. Today we have on the broadcast Dr. Stephen Lewis, who is a curator at the National Museum of African American Music. He's presented his research at national and international conferences and has worked with historical organizations, including the Thomas Jefferson Foundation and the Smithsonian Institution. Dr. Lewis, I'm so glad to have you today. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, this was supposed to be the year of that the museum was supposed to get off, I think, this fall, and there were some activities planned for May. Being that we're in this COVID era, could you enlighten our viewers as to what's going on with the museum right now and what are your plans for this year?
Sure. I mean, of course, this is an unprecedented time for all of us in the city and the country and the world. But we're still making really exciting progress on our construction. At this point, we've got several of the galleries partially installed, one of them mostly finished, and we are still planning to have our opening in September. Although, like every other organization in the city, we are kind of adapting quickly as we get new information from the city government and the state government. So it's the important thing at this time, I think, is remaining flexible, even as we're continuing to make progress on our construction. So things are still moving ahead. We're still very excited about welcoming people to the museum later this fall.
And as just for viewers who are not familiar with the National Museum of African American Music, I mean, this is momentous. This is there's nothing else like it. And here in Nashville, it would be a celebration of African American music. Would you talk a little bit about what the museum's mission is and what is it that people can expect once they have a chance to go enjoy the gallery?
Sure. So the mission of the museum is to preserve, educate, and celebrate the history of African American music. And so, like you said, it's a never before told story. And it really, the aspect of it that is so unprecedented is that we take a comprehensive approach to the history of Black music, beginning with the earliest Black people to arrive in the English colonies in the 17th century, and then continuing up to the present day. So we're talking about 400 years of music. And in terms of subject matter, it ranges from, of course, the African roots of African American music through the development of Black religious music, the blues, jazz, rhythm and blues, and hip hop. And in addition to that, we have a 15-minute film that will show all of our visitors in what we call the Roots Theater, that is kind of a 10,000-foot view of the history of the Black experience and Black music in America. So, like you said, it's a historic opportunity, I think, to give people a really comprehensive and broad overview, not only of African American music, but also American culture in general, because of the way that Black music is really at the foundation of the traditions that we all share.
It's certainly fitting that the museum is here in Music City, of all places. It's going to be right there on Broadway and Fifth, and it's going to be. I'm excited to go see it. I've had a chance to meet with officials from the museum and get to see plans over the years. In terms of some of the things that really excite you, I know there's probably so much that excites you about the museum, but if there's one particular thing that is really compelling, that people really, if they had one chance to check out something, let's say when it opens, what would you recommend they do?
Okay, so my personal favorite artifact, which again, I'm biased. I mean, for full disclosure, so I started out in music as a saxophonist and then went to school to study jazz saxophone. And so, I have since become a much more comprehensive kind of music scholar, but, my roots are in jazz. And so my favorite thing that will be in the museum is a trombone that was donated by Mrs. Helen Jones Woods. And Mrs. Helen Jones Woods was a member of a very important jazz ensemble in the World War II era called the International Sweethearts of Rhythm. And so why this group was so important is that they were the first interracial all-women jazz ensemble to become nationally famous. So they formed at a small orphanage in Mississippi called the Piney Woods Country Life School and went on to tour the country supporting the USO during World War II. So it's a really amazing story that is not as well known as it should be, because really these women are heroes of music. And we're excited not only to get to tell that story, but also to get to show one of the instruments that one of these musicians used on that tour. So that's my personal favorite story from the museum. But really there's hundreds of things like that in our collection.
This past week, we were recording on May 8th today, but this past week, the Pulitzer Prizes were announced and some major props for African American contributions, from the posthumous award to I.W. Wells, the legendary journalist who worked in Memphis and studied at Fisk University before going to Chicago, and also to the 1619 Project of the New York Times. One of the things I think that people have difficulty still thinking about is the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow, and also the fact that we live in a place where we deal with Confederate monuments, the Nathan Bedford Forrest thing. And I wanted to ask you how you integrate those musical traditions in helping people understand what sometimes is really painful history.
Sure. Well, so we really take an approach that, of course, grounds the music and the developments in music in the broader historical context, with the understanding that music is the product of the experiences of the people who make it, right? And so when we talk about, for example, the history of the blues, of course, we talk about the imposition of Jim Crow laws in the late 19th century, for one. When we talk about the history of Black religious music, we talk about the beginnings of slavery in America, the forced conversion of thousands of Africans to Christianity, in the 17th and 18th centuries. And so, but at the same time, I think that music has a way of bringing us closer to the experiences of individuals in a way that makes history more immediate, and also makes some of these really challenging historical facts more, I guess, accessible to the visitor, if that makes sense. Because when you listen to say, a recording of someone like Blind Lemon Jefferson, you are hearing the experiences of a man who was, who was a Black man in the teens and 20s. You have a much more immediate window into the experiences of a person like yourself in an extremely different historical circumstance, if that makes sense. So I really think that there are a couple of things about music and history. One being that Black music is sort of an alternative archive of history, right? There are some insights to Black history that you really get from paying attention to the musical legacy. The second thing being that music offers us a window into the individual's experience, and then also allows us to put it in the context of the culture overall. So yeah, we do broach those subjects, and in addition to confronting people with the difficult facts, we also talk about the ways in which music has been an important component of civil rights activism, not only in the 50s and 60s, but going back to the very beginnings of the Black experience in America.
This evoked memories of two recent documentaries I saw. One was the Ken Burns country music documentary, and some of the conversations around Charlie Pride and others who have influenced music, but even before that. But also, I recently saw a documentary about Nina Simone, and I was vaguely familiar with her music, but I really became enthralled with her history of radicalism and looking at her songs from the 1960s. I'll abbreviate by saying, Mississippi GD. I'll say it that way. But just how powerful that was at a time when it was life risking to do something like that.
Right. Exactly. And I mean, of course, we talk about Nina Simone in the museum. And because, again, she's not only such an important civil rights activist in music, but also she's such a fascinating musician, just in terms of the way that her music is a blend of course, her classical training, but also important aspects of the jazz tradition. And then also these other musical influences like show tunes on Broadway that she kind of absorbs during her career, and then uses that really unique blend of styles in service of an activist mission. So she's a really important figure. And it's great that she is kind of having a resurgence in terms of being really iconic for a new generation of listeners,
Now, I grew up, my mother is from Cuba, and one of the voices that was constantly in our home was Celia Cruz, the Afro-Cuban entertainer and singer who passed away a few years ago. And, as an adult looking at her lyrics, it's much different experience than when you just, want to dance to it, which is, this is really lyrics of representation, at a time when, people were not getting that same level of respect. And even today, when, we have the tragic case of Ahmaud Arbery, that we know that still racism and violence against Black people is still very much alive. And I know we're here to talk about museum things, but I guess this has been top of mind in terms of how today, we were supposed to be past this stuff. I mean, and maybe music can be a way to heal this stuff.
We can only hope. I mean, music is certainly one of the most important types of commentary that is available to us, and has been that for a long ways back in the past for African Americans in particular. And again, I think that one important role that music can play at this time, if people listen, like you described doing to Celia Cruz's music, is to, again, give people insight into other people's perspectives that they might not always encounter outside of the artistic sphere, if that makes sense. So, the music, like you said, in Celia Cruz's case, it's dance music. Much African American music is functional in the sense that it facilitates dance, or it facilitates religious worship. At the same time, it's also political in many cases, in that there is a commentary on the state of things, and so it's multi-layered, and one thing hopefully the museum can do is to provide a space where people can reflect on the different ways that the music is significant.
No, thank you. And let me change subject for just a moment to ask you, this show is also about putting a little bit of levity when it comes to the issues of quarantine. This has been difficult for so many people to be stuck working from home. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've been doing to stay sane, essentially? What are you reading, watching that is helping you get through this time?
Yeah, well, I have really been catching up on like 2 years of reading. I mean, because I sort of ordered a ton of books when I started this job. The job has been very busy, and I have not had much time to read. And so, in the evenings in particular, I've been able to do a lot of reading that I've been meaning to do for a long time. I also have taken up the banjo and am playing very, very poorly in my apartment. So things like that. Some things that I have been meaning to do, hobbies and things like that. That now that I really don't have the option to go anywhere after work is over. There's sort of a new opportunity to hopefully read some new exciting books, or books that are new and exciting to me rather. And then also learn some more about music. I'm excited to get to learn the banjo because the banjo has such a deep history in African American culture. And reading about it, I've been excited about exploring the banjo as an instrument for a while. So it's cool to be able to do stuff like that.
So any consolation, I am poorly playing the acoustic guitar these days as part of my own personal therapy. But in terms of the books that you're reading, is there anyone that you'd recommend to the public at large?
Let's see. I mean, there's a very good book of jazz criticism that came out last year. It's called Playing Changes. It's by Nate Chinan. And really what it's about is the past 15 or so years of jazz history. When we talk about jazz, people tend to think about kind of the most iconic figures of like the 60s. And so people like Miles Davis and John Coltrane, and then earlier people, of course, like Duke Ellington, Ella Fitzgerald. But, something exciting about this book is that the author really gets deep into contemporary trends in the music, and to me, this is interesting because, I mean, the contemporary music we hear most about tends to be the music that is the most commercial, or the music that is the most consumed. But there's a lot of really interesting kind of musical experimentation happening in other kind of areas of African American music. So that's been one of my favorite books, I'd say, of the past, during this period reading it, but then it came out like a year or two ago. So I guess one of my favorite books of the past couple of years, technically.
No, it's a great recommendation. One of the things that it evoked to me as a memory, I remember I bought Cornel West's CD it was over a decade ago. It was quite some time ago. But it was really interesting, that whole notion of storytelling. And he's a professor, and he, very well-known professor, and used that CD to sing and play about, storytelling, families, and it almost was like, and also communicating his values as well. So that to me was really, really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, so Cornel West is someone who, he's very much in kind of the activist tradition in Black America that has its roots in the church and in preaching as an oratorical style, right? And preaching itself is there's a very porous kind of boundary between speech and music, in that tradition, right? And so Cornel West is really adept at evoking music in his speech. Having seen him present, there's a rhythm to his speech that I think is part of the effectiveness. But then also in drawing on the examples of musical figures to illustrate his points, right? So he's written some really brilliant essays about musicians. One of my favorites of his is an essay he wrote on the spirituals, the African American spiritual tradition that is in kind of a preface to a collection of spirituals that I've got here. And, again, he kind of synthesizes a bunch of different aspects of African American thinking and African American arts and culture, right? And then is able to present them in a really engaging way,
We talked about the Pulitzers earlier, and I remember a few years ago, Kendrick Lamar won a Pulitzer Prize for his album Damn, and it's a powerful social commentary, and it's sometimes so soulful and so sad. I actually remember when I was on a train, a light rail in Minneapolis, of all places, when I first listened to it on a trip, and it was powerful. And this whole notion of reflecting the time that we're in, because there's so much fear right now in the world. We're in an election year, and people are trying to make sense of that. And do you have any sense that within this COVID crisis and other crises that there's more art being made that we may not be anticipating, or you have any sense of that?
I actually think so. I mean, at the risk of, because of course, musicians are struggling right now because for a lot of people, their livelihood is no longer available to them until it becomes safe for people to gather in large groups. Performance requires a crowd, of paying customers who support the artist. At the same time, there are some really interesting things that, kind of data points that we've seen, in places like Rolling Stone, where, sales of musical instruments and software like GarageBand are way up. Something else I read about is the way that some musicians are making what they call quarantine albums, right? And so really what this means is that, being on lockdown, so to speak, has kind of given a lot of musicians the time to work on creative projects that they may have had to put to the side during their normal working lives, when they had to be out of the house doing things all the time. So, I do think that there are a lot of people who are, refining their technique and practicing a lot more than they would. I think there are people who are, starting new projects and new albums. And also, I think that there are people who are still pursuing collaboration at this time, using things like Skype, or FaceTime. Like there are songwriters who collaborate in real time who are writing music right now. Probably a lot in Nashville as we speak, I'm sure. And so yeah, I think that, for whatever it's worth, I think it's worth quite a bit. There will be some interesting music that will come out of this time. There are a lot of people who are working on new things right now, for sure. So
again, my guest is Dr. Stephen Lewis, a curator at the National Museum of African American Music. And if people want to learn more about the museum, where should they go?
So definitely check out our website, nmaam.org, and then also follow us on social media. Right now, we are functioning as a museum without walls. We have a lot of exciting community programs that are set up by our Director of Education and Public Programs, Tamara Smithers, and you can access those programs on our social media. So, we have interviews, we have roundtable discussions, things like that. So we encourage you all to enjoy some of our content if you are, looking for a diversion and looking for some education and enlightenment.
That's great. And for viewers, again, you're watching this on Tennessean.com/opinion. You can watch this episode as well as past episodes. And Dr. Lewis, as I often do with my guests, I'd like to ask you to leave us with a couple of parting words of wisdom as we really start considering the things in our life and how to get through this very challenging time.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's important to, in relation to the discussion we've had, I think it's important to remember that music is a really powerful consolation in difficult times. I think I would encourage everyone to find some time in the day to be creative and to, make something for their own enjoyment. And that certainly has been what has been helping me during this time. So I hope it works for the viewers as well.
Dr. Lewis, thank you very much again. I appreciate your time, and I wish you the best to stay healthy and well during this time.
You too. Thank you.